Willys MB L134 engine starter motor installation. Installing the starter motor is not necessarily difficult, but before you begin, you'll want to clean the paint down to the bare metal on the boss and the back side of the backer plate and the bell housing. The starter motor is grounded to the engine block at these locations. I've also wire wheeled cleaned the original mounting bolt and the small bracket that attaches to the boss on the engine. I've cleaned the paint down to bare metal on the small bracket, but I didn't do the threads nor the face that mates to the starter. I'll attach the small bracket to the block using the bolt and the lock washer. The face on the small bracket where I removed all the paint down to the bare metal is in direct contact with the cleaned boss on the engine block. I'm just going to go ahead and snug up the bolt on the block to hold the bracket in place so I can work on it. I could have done this on the bench, but I figured it'd be more interesting to look at while I do it on the actual block itself. The bolt itself in the small bracket actually is part of the grounding system as well, so I'll take an appropriate size tap and I will tap out the threads to remove any paint or any corrosion that's on the inside of them. Once the threads are all clean, I'll remove the tap and then I'll take a Dremel tool and I'll remove a small amount of paint around that actual bolt hole as well. A rotary tool with a sandpaper drum like this is perfect for taking off paint down to the bare metal in situations just like this. If you needed to, you could do this by hand with a simple piece of sandpaper. I'm going to remove the paint and the primer from around the bolt location about 1/4 of an inch outside of it. Before installing the starter motor, I'm going to put a little dab of grease on the bushing that's inside the bell housing. Apply a small film of grease on the shaft of the starter as well. The starter motor is part number A1245. On the bracket here that mounts to the small bracket on the front of the boss, I've taken my Dremel tool and removed the paint as well. Holding the starter square to the bell housing, insert the shaft into the bushing on the back side of the bell housing. The fit into the bushing should be snug. You may have to wiggle the starter back and forth, but it will slide in pretty easily. You shouldn't have to use excessive force to install the starter. Once the bolt holes are lined up, I'll install the bolts and the lock washers to the 2 openings on the bell housing. I cleaned these 2 original bolts on the wire wheel as well because they do play a part in grounding the starter motor. For the time being, I'm just going to put the 2 bolts finger tight because I've still got to attach the small bracket to the back side of the starter. I'm just going to turn the small bracket to the left so the 2 surfaces that I cleaned mate to each other, and then I'll install the bolt and the lock washer. The bolt and the lock washer are fastened into the threads that are in the casting of the starter. Now that all the fasteners are lined up in their correct location, I'll go back with a socket and a ratchet and tighten all the bolts. When it's time to do the actual wiring on the starter motor, I will be attaching a bond strap or ground strap as it may be called to the back side of this bracket as well. For now, I'll just go ahead and snug it up with a wrench. The last bolt to be tightened will be the bolt that attaches to the boss on the side of the block. The last step in installation is to torque all the bolts between 20 and 25 foot-pounds. Your starter motor is installed.